These public domain videos have been a blast. So, per request, I'm going to keep that going and talk about cartoons.
Starting with this one. Maybe my wishful thinking, but it'll be free advertising.
Welcome to my channel, KC. That's me, Carrie Chug, the Sledge storyteller, here to talk about the wonderful world of storytelling, and in this case, some inspiring, readily available storytelling in the public domain in the realm of cartoons. Once again, after deciding that it was worth exploring that after a viewer suggested it. So to clarify, public domain here refers to media that has reached a status where no one can claim ownership, either due to reaching a certain age, which currently means anything that came out before 1928, or if the owner fails to renew copyright at the proper juncture. Most of these cartoons here they're going to fall into the status of the former, though you need to be cautious in recognizing that there will be other iterations, mainly post-1928, of the characters in these cartoons that will still be under studio ownership. And all of them are cartoon shorts that were frequently set to come on just before a feature film started at the theater. So after that clarification...
So much more of Walt Disney's creative development than what I cover here can be learned in the A&E documentary Walt, the Man Behind the Myth. There's a lot of coverage about his flaws, but I think even those talked about here who were at odds with him had to acknowledge about how much of a pioneer he was in developing animation as an art form. And what's even more interesting is how many of the other time-honored figures talked about in this video, they branched out from the Disney tree. There's been all kinds of talk lately that the first Mickey Mouse cartoon ever released, Steamboat Willie, will enter public domain next year, but Disney, he famously said it all started with a mouse. But perhaps more accurately stated, his most consistent success started with a mouse. Walt's beginnings in the industry began shortly after he finished his service in World War I with his equally ambitious buddies, Ub Iwerks, Isidore Fritz Freleng, Fred Harmon, whose brother Hugh came later, Rudolph Rudy Ising, Carmen Max Maxwell. They all put in blood, sweat, and tears. But it all started with Laugh-O-Grams. Disney and his crew started off with some basic, yet for its time innovative cartoons. They give so much insight into the evolution of animation, and is one more thing that makes the 1920s feel less like the Stone Age. I mean, the Alice episodes show comedy's blending of cartoons with live action so beautifully. Also, while Disney is now known so much for their adaptations of old fairy tales, long before those movies had even been thought of, you had these Laugh-O-Grams that came out with fashion and surroundings contemporary to the time. Oswald the Lucky Rabbit gives us a massive what if. He was supposed to be the big marquee character for Disney and the animators working with him, before producer Charles Mintz set new terms that signed away all those animators except Ub Iwerks, and gave Disney a strict production budget cut, which he refused, and led him to quit Oswald. All this time, Mintz had been releasing Oswald cartoons through Universal Studios, and interestingly, things went full circle when Disney Studios brought back Oswald from Universal in 2006, with part of the deal being that Universal, who owned NBC at the time, got Al Michaels as their play-by-play commentator for Sunday Night Football after years with Disney, owned ABC and ESPN doing play-by-play for Monday Night Football. Of this, Al famously said, "Oswald is definitely worth more than a fourth-round draft choice. I'm going to be a trivia answer someday." This in an article with magazine Game Informer. But all Oswald cartoons produced in 1927 are now in public domain, and are a lot of fun with the 1920s cartoon hijinks, mischief, and all that mixed into the adventure.
Now, speaking for myself, I can put on those rose-colored glasses that appreciate 1920s animation, so I can recommend trying it, but if those same glasses don't fit you, okay, but I say there's something fun about the archival entertainment here.
Now, even before I thought of making this video, I had already been enriched by the YouTube video series, The Merry History of Looney Tunes by Kaiser Beams. If you grew up watching Looney Tunes cartoons, whether with the classic Bugs Bunny shows on Saturday morning, or the much older Looney Tunes shorts on your local station, you're in for a lot of "I had no idea" moments as a complete backstory is told. But it also sent me in the right direction as to what to look into to make this video. As mentioned before, the branches from the Disney tree went far, and the biggest one ended up at Warner Brothers. Those aforementioned animators who stuck around with Charles Mintz to animate Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. This in large part that they felt that Walt Disney had pushed them too hard. And wouldn't you know it, the producer over there, George Winkler, turned out to be even worse. So they quit Universal and started developing their own cartoons independent of anyone else. Specifically, these men were Rudy Ising, Friz Freleng, Max Maxwell, and Hugh Harman. Their immediate answer to Disney's Mickey Mouse was Bosco. Now, controversy related to racial depictions comes immediately to mind, and indeed, when those animators were cornered enough, they admitted that Bosco was officially registered in the U.S. Copyright Office as a little Negro boy. It's pretty hard to sort out where Bosco stands with the black community. I haven't heard much input from there. While he was designed in blackface, his depictions carry no other element involving lampooned racial stereotypes, and few argue that there isn't charm to his personality and antics. Speaking for myself, I let headcanon take over and reinterpret these two, Bosco and his love interest Honey, their own form of beings no more out of their element than anthropomorphic mice. But Bosco ended up in Warner Brothers after producer Leon Schlesinger hired these animators, and the first unashamed sign of the group's copying Disney was taking Walt Disney's cartoon series of Silly Symphonies and showing them under the banner of, all with similar antics as what people were getting from Mickey Mouse. Now, Warner Brothers Bosco cartoons running from 1930 through 1931, they fall under public domain. Harman and Ising, who were the head animators, eventually saw greener pastures in MGM and took Bosco there. The antics in these cartoons had similarities again with those in the Mickey Mouse cartoons. The animators admitted to studying them as reference, but somehow Walt kept quiet about that, but not when it came to our next public domain cartoon from Warner Brothers, in which Walt's protest led to only 3 episodes getting made because of similar imagery. So when it comes to Foxy Fox, who knows what would happen if Warner Brothers had any foresight as to any interest animation history buffs might have with what cartoons were made. But Foxy Fox had the same kind of charm and mischief that made these cartoons coming out at the time sound had been widely established in cinema recently. This was actually because the beginnings of the Warner Brothers parallel series to Looney Tunes, Merry Melodies.
Just don't hold your breath for the more familiar Warner Brothers cartoon characters Bugs, Porky, Daffy.
Like Disney and Warner Brothers, there's an awesome documentary available on the Fleischer brothers, who formed Fleischer Studios, Out of the Inkwell, the Fleischer Brothers story, which can be found on YouTube as of this upload, unclear if it's there legally. For all the innovations achieved by those under Disney and Warner Brothers, they hopped on the animation bandwagon after Fleischer Studios had many of their own strides already. Many of the classic Disney animated movies play out with beautiful fluidity, and this was largely because of the technique called rotoscoping, where animation frames are drawn with live-action references, following the entire range of motion. That had already been perfected by Fleischer Studios in Out of the Inkwell, Coco the Clown. But as you would hope, besides just the lifelike motion, impressive even by today's standards, the personality and antics of the cartoons are also engaging, not only as a story but as a cultural time capsule of the 1920s, though these cartoons began in 1919. Now, anybody who's familiar with the Fleischer Brothers will know at minimum that they animated Betty Boop and Popeye. Copyright status on Betty Boop. Simple Googling will take you to an article that will cover all the complications concerning ownership. I found no video on YouTube that really covers it. That may prompt a request for me to make one, but getting access to the court documents to do it justice complicates doing that. As for Popeye, there are some Fleischer produced episodes that fell through the cracks. I'll just list them in the description below. Now, I've never found any critique that disagreed with me on the notion that the Fleischer Popeye cartoons are Popeye at his best ever, as opposed to the mostly bland episodes from Famous Studios after they took over. There are a few that I do like, but the Fleischer brothers seem to have plot pacing down to a science that made all the gags and hijinks flow perfectly. What's more is the jaw-dropping innovation of 3D backgrounds. That is an actual hand-built miniature set you're looking at. But take advantage of these titles and watch them either on YouTube or Internet Archive. Another cartoon series that fell into public domain that got straddled between Fleischer and Famous Studios are the 1940s Superman cartoons. Now, to clarify, Warner Brothers owns the original 35mm specs of these cartoons, as well as ancillary rights that include merchandising. You can take this image of Superman and make a figurine or poster out of it. Warner can sue you. But these cartoons are readily free at your disposal, though Warner Brothers has taken that extra step to put it on Blu-ray. Now, the rotoscope Fleischer fluidity makes its magic here, and that the villains create qualified conflict against him and never hesitate. Again, a pet peeve of mine, and it's an interesting thing to get a glimpse that way into Superman's development at this point, only a few years after his debut in the comics. And in the comics, at this time, his airborne abilities were limited to a leap of 1/8 of a mile. But these cartoons helped spur his ultimately being able to fly, even if that aspect was a bit iffy in the first few episodes. But, here, Superman, he's a guy you can like, very likable. At the same time, though, you can appreciate his real toughness here. He pulls no punches.
But overall, by 7-minute short standards, these are a lot of fun.
So, Felix the Cat. According to Wikipedia, Felix began in the studio of Australian cartoonist and film entrepreneur Pat Sullivan. Conflicting accounts say that the creation was by him or his lead animator, American Otto Messmer. In its initial debut of November 9th, 1919, Master Tom, a prototype of Felix, debuted in a Paramount Pictures cartoon short titled Feline Follies, followed by Musical Nephews. That was November 16th of that same year, still Master Tom. But the permanent moniker came a month later in The Adventures of Felix. After that, it all snowballed into a lot of 1920s success with so many episodes that followed, much of the same kind of fun as would be used by Disney and Warner Brothers much later. So we get the idea that these early cartoons inspired much later cartoons.
But here you're looking at the beginnings of Animal Antics.
But you also have the first ever cartoon, Phantasmagoria. Check out all this. Chalkboard stuff. You can see it both being primitive and innovative. And the trailblazing Gertie the Dinosaur, all displaying the evolving art of animation on film at its beginning.
And thanks to free streaming platforms like YouTube or Internet Archive, they're all readily available for your viewing and educational pleasure. That's my take on public domain cartoons. Thank you for watching. Agree, disagree, or something I left out, please let me know in the comment section. If you like this video, please click like. If you like this channel, please click subscribe or follow me on Instagram. As always, the link to order Sledge number 1 and 2 is below in the description there, or you can order Sledge number 1 on Kindle. In any case, you can order it in digital or paper format. Still working on Sledge number 3 for it to be a strong ending to the 3-part miniseries. I'm keeping in touch with Tiago as he finishes the few remaining pages. But I'll keep saying it, let's all look for civility amid all the bad news out there about social and political strife. Let's not hate, and let's find friends wherever we can go. Everyone be safe, and God bless.